Something was wrong with this tournament from the very first whistle, back in the second week of June. Now, both semifinals are done. Spain dismantled France, Argentina survived England in a stoppage-time street fight, and in its final days, the field cut down from 48 teams to 2, the trophy exactly one match away in New Jersey. The dust has finally settled enough to look back at the whole shape of it. This is not wrong in the way a bad refereeing decision is wrong, a single moment forgotten by the next kickoff. It is wrong in a slower, more deliberate way, wrong in the architecture of the thing itself. For nearly a century, the World Cup ran on a kind of sacred unpredictability. 90 minutes, 2 halves. Whatever happened, happened, and nobody outside the pitch got to interrupt it. That unpredictability was the entire product. It's why billions of people who will never meet each other, who don't even speak the same language, sit in front of a screen at the same moment, hearts in their throats, not knowing what comes next. In 2026, that unpredictability didn't disappear. It got redesigned, and every redesign, without exception, points in the same direction, toward a screen, a sponsor, and a broadcast rights holder who paid billions of dollars for this exact tournament and needed it to behave. You've been told the ball is just the next evolution of football technology. You've been told the pauses in play exist for player safety, even inside air-conditioned domes where no player was ever in danger of overheating. You've been told the cameras chasing exhausted players into the tunnel are closer access for the fans. Even the whistle itself, who blows it, when, and for whom, has heading into Sunday's final become the single most argued about element of the entire tournament. I'm not going to tell you the World Cup is fake. That word is too small, too naive for a business operating at this scale. I'm going to do something more useful than that, now that there's an entire tournament's worth of evidence sitting in front of us, from the opening kickoff to this weekend's final. I'm going to show you, piece by piece, decision by decision, exactly how much of what you watched was never left to chance in the first place, and let you decide for yourself what that means before that trophy actually gets lifted. Keeps landing a little differently depending on who's standing over the ball, a question that finally gets to matter more than it ever has with an actual trophy on the line. Before we go any further, and this will only take 5 seconds, if any of that just made your stomach drop a little, do 3 things right now. Subscribe so the next hidden rule change FIFA slips in doesn't get past you the way all 5 of these did. Hit like, because on this platform, that's the only vote that decides whether an investigation like this one ever reaches anyone else's feed. And if you want channels like this one to keep pulling threads like this instead of recycling the same matchday recap as everyone else, that's what actually supports the work. Let's start with the one thing that was never supposed to be political, the ball itself, or rather, the ball FIFA already quietly retired. For most of football's history, the ball was the one variable both teams could trust with their eyes closed. Dozens of stitched panels, refined over decades into something close to physical law. A striker who caught it clean could predict, almost to the inch, where it would end up 30 yards later. A goalkeeper who read the flight correctly could get there in time to meet it. That predictability was never boring. It was the entire moral foundation the sport rested on. A save was a save because both sides were operating under the same rules of physics. A goal was earned, not gifted, by an object neither team fully understood. The 2026 ball broke that foundation. Whether that was ever the plan is something Adidas will never admit to on the record. It's called the Trianda, where a traditional match ball is built from dozens or more stitched panels. This one is built from just 4, the fewest ever put on a football at any World Cup. Fewer panels means fewer seams. Fewer seams means a smoother, slicker skin cutting through the air. And the shape underneath that skin is based on a tetrahedron instead of the classic tiled sphere generations of players grew up striking. If you know your football history, that detail alone should make the hair on your arm stand up, because the last time a World Cup ball was engineered this smooth, this seamless, it had a different name: Jabulani, South Africa, 2010. To this day, the single most despised object in the sport's modern history. A ball goalkeepers compared, without irony, to something you'd buy in a supermarket toy aisle. Adidas insisted the Trianda was different. 3.5 years in development, 300 separate lab tests, deep grooves and debossed lines, engineered in their words for optimal in-flight stability. That was the official story, and it was a good one. Here is what actually happened on the pitch, underneath the official story. Aerodynamics researchers in Japan ran the Trianda through rigorous testing before it ever touched a competitive stadium, and their findings were quietly troubling. Struck hard and flat at the kind of velocity a World Cup striker generates without even trying, the ball did not hold its line the way it should. It lost range. It sank out of the air earlier than 2 decades of goalkeeping instinct had trained a professional's body to expect. And the tournament proved the lab right in real time in front of billions of people. Jordan Pickford got a full hand to a shot against Croatia and still watched it cross the line behind him. Algeria's Luka Zidane was beaten the exact same way twice in 2 separate matches. Edouard Mendy, Ahmed Basel, undone by a Kylian Mbappe strike from a distance he should have comfortably covered. Different countries, different goalkeeping pedigrees, the same goal on a loop tournament after tournament. Former England goalkeeper Joe Hart said it out loud on live television after watching the pattern repeat for what felt like the 10th time. Something's up with that football. Former Denmark international Kasper Schmeichel, who trained privately with the Trianda for months before the tournament even began, was more critical about the cause. It wasn't extra wobble catching keepers out, he explained. It was the speed. A marginal difference by his own account, but in goalkeeping, the margins are the entire job. This became the highest scoring World Cup since 1958, and the goals kept climbing every round. Every long-range screamer that went viral by midnight was free, algorithm-friendly publicity for this tournament, built quietly on the backs of goalkeepers turned, one save at a time, into the unwitting villains of their own matches. They did not get worse at their jobs overnight. The object they were catching changed underneath them, and nobody asked their permission. And FIFA itself, in the end, seemed to agree there was a problem worth quietly solving. Before a single ball was kicked in the semifinals, Adidas wheeled out a brand new match ball, the Trianda Final, purpose-built for the last 4 games of the tournament. Officially, it's a celebration, a shinier design for the biggest stage, gold and black to match the trophy. Unofficially, it means the ball responsible for 170+ chaotic goals and every one of those goalkeeping nightmares will not be within 100 yards of the trophy when it's finally lifted. Draw your own conclusions about why. Now let's talk about the pause, written into the laws of this tournament for the first time in World Cup history and defended by FIFA with a single, simple word: welfare. 22 minutes into every half, in every single one of the 104 matches at this World Cup, the referee's whistle stopped the game dead. 3 minutes, whistle to whistle, no exceptions, no discretion left to the official standing on the pitch. This was never a referee reading the conditions and making a judgment call the way it used to work. This was a rule, immovable, scheduled, guaranteed. FIFA's justification sounds reasonable on its face. Player welfare, heat, dehydration, a genuine duty of care in a brutal North American summer, with wet bulb globe temperatures in some host cities climbing toward levels that have historically triggered medical emergencies in elite athletes. Nobody serious is disputing that heat can kill. That part of the story is completely real and it deserves to be taken seriously. Here is the part that stops adding up the moment you actually watch a full match card. This break didn't only appear under the blistering afternoon sun of Miami or Monterey. It happened inside domes, under closed roofs, with climate control running the entire time. It happened in Seattle, in weather so mild that players on both sides had barely broken a sweat before the whistle blew for the first time. Same 3 minutes, same mandatory stoppage regardless of the actual temperature on the pitch that day, regardless of whether there was a single medical justification for it to exist in that specific stadium at that specific hour. A human body needs, generously, 10 or 15 seconds to take on water. FIFA handed out 3 full, uninterrupted minutes, twice a match, in every game on the planet, hot or cold, indoors or out, whether the conditions demanded it or not. So what filled those 3 minutes in every single match, regardless of climate? Advertising. A dedicated, guaranteed commercial window sold directly to broadcasters, branded by a sports drink sponsor whose logo dominated every stadium screen the instant play stopped. FIFA's own president publicly denied there was any additional revenue in this for the organization. Watch the actual broadcast the next time that whistle goes, count the seconds of sponsor branding on screen, and decide for yourself whether you believe him. The tactical damage stopped being a theory a long time ago. It sat cold and undeniable in the data. In this tournament's opening rounds alone, more than 1 in every 5 goals scored arrived within 5 minutes of one of these breaks. Watch what happened when the Netherlands raced into a completely dominant, one-sided lead against Sweden, 4 shots to 1, everything going their way, until the whistle blew. Sweden's manager gathered his players at the touchline for a full tactical reset, and the entire shape of the match flipped the instant play resumed. Watch Canada, pegged back by an early Bosnian goal, use the very next hydration break to completely rebuild their shape, their shot count exploding 5-fold in the minutes that followed the restart. That was not coincidence. Repeated match after match, round after round. That was a free timeout gifted to whichever coach needed it most, stitched permanently into the rhythm of a sport that was never built to have one. And the boos never stopped either. They rang out in stadium after stadium, from England fans drowning out a break with a stadium-wide sing-along in the group stage, all the way to this week's quarterfinals, whether the roof was open or closed. Even the most disciplined managers stopped pretending the pause was just about water. Camera after camera has caught coaches, England's among them, using those 3 minutes to draw up instructions like it's a timeout borrowed from an entirely different sport. Even the players stopped pretending not to notice. Virgil van Dijk said the quiet part out loud, describing what it felt like to simply watch this tournament as a neutral fan. Every 22 minutes, like clockwork, the game cuts to commercial. Emma Hayes, one of the most respected coaches in the sport, didn't call them hydration breaks at all. She called them momentum breaks, because that, in her own words, was their actual function, whatever label the rulebook gave them. Marcelo Bielsa went further still, warning that dividing 2 halves into 4 separate quarters rewrites the entire cultural identity of the sport for reasons he refused to even dignify with a name. He didn't need to name it. By now, we already know exactly what it's called. And then, this summer, FIFA found one more piece of dead air to fill in the schedule: the walk down the tunnel. For the first time in the tournament's history, players leaving the pitch at halftime soaked in sweat, chests heaving, with barely 15 minutes to physically and mentally reset before the biggest 45 minutes of their entire year were contractually required to stop, face a camera, answer questions, live, unscripted, in whatever emotional state the first half left them in, on command. Not after the match, once there's finally time to breathe and think. During it, mid-recovery, mid-tunnel, with a physio waiting just out of frame and a manager waiting just beyond that. On the opening night of this entire World Cup, Brazil against Morocco, one player decided he had had enough of it. Vinicius Jr. walked toward that camera, and he walked straight past it. A reporter pressed him, invoking the fine FIFA could impose for the refusal. Vinicius didn't break stride. His answer has since traveled further online than almost anything that actually happened during the match itself. "We will pay the fine, but we will not give any interviews." Sit with that sentence for a moment, because it is doing more work than it first appears to. One of the most commercially valuable athletes on the planet, mid-tournament, on the single biggest stage of his career, calculated that a broadcast fine was a price worth paying just to be treated like a human being recovering from 90 minutes of combat, instead of a content asset with 90 seconds left on the clock. That is not arrogance. That is a small, precise act of rebellion, aimed directly at a system that stopped asking players what they were willing to sacrifice for the cameras a long time ago, and never looked back to check. FIFA never confirmed any formal punishment, but the message had already landed in locker rooms far beyond Brazil's long before any fine could be processed. Athletes are not props to be walked out on command, and at least one of the biggest stars in the sport was done pretending otherwise. Fine or no fine. Here is a question worth sitting with, one that has nothing to do with a ball or a whistle. How exactly did these bodies survive this? This was the largest World Cup ever staged. 48 teams, up from 32. 104 matches stretched across 39 days, instead of the roughly 32 days every previous tournament allowed, and it unfolded across a landmass so vast that some squads crossed more time zone disruption, reaching their base camp, than most transcontinental flights cause in a single single trip. In the most extreme cases, close to 19 time zones worth of disruption to a player's internal clock before a ball had even been kicked, layered directly on top of a European club season that for many of these same players had only finished a matter of days earlier. Add the climate itself. Wet bulb globe temperatures in more than a dozen of the 16 host cities reached levels that sports medicine researchers explicitly flagged as having no precedent at any previous World Cup. Heat stress thresholds that, combined with humidity, can trigger the kind of exertional collapse that has historically killed elite athletes on the field of play. Then stack altitude on top of that. Mexico City sits more than 7,000 feet above sea level. Guadalajara over 5,000. Both cities thin enough on oxygen to cause dizziness and fatigue in athletes who trained for this tournament almost entirely at sea level. Before a single club competition had even ended for the year, the players' own global union, FIFPro, representing footballers worldwide alongside domestic bodies like the Professional Footballers Association, was already warning publicly that this calendar was asking human bodies to perform without the recovery time medicine says they need. And the warning wasn't hypothetical. Injury, burnout, a slow, cumulative decline in decision-making sharp enough to cost a match that doesn't show up on a stat sheet until it's already too late to reverse. So how did teams actually cope? Not with secrets, with machines. GPS trackers stitched into every training vest, logging distance and intensity in real time. On-field ultrasound units wheeled out within minutes of a suspected knock to make the call between play on and pull him now before the damage compounded into something season-ending. Iron and oxygen saturation monitoring for the altitude cities, sleep scientists managing travel schedules with the same precision a flight engineer manages fuel loads, because at this level, rest is treated with exactly the same seriousness as a set-piece routine. Even something as mundane as melatonin, sold over the counter at any pharmacy, needed formal medical sign-off under World Cup testing protocols before a team doctor would touch it. That was the real story of how modern football bodies were kept upright through the most physically punishing tournament format in the sport's history, not a hidden shortcut, an entire expensive, unglamorous science operating in the background 24 hours a day to stop this format from breaking the very players it was built to showcase. And now, in this final week, that toll is no longer theoretical. It's on screen. Squads that arrived in June at full strength are limping into the semifinals, held together by strapping, painkillers, and reserve players who were never supposed to start a knockout match. The same bodies that looked almost superhuman in the group stage are, by the second week of July, visibly running on fumes in extra time, which is exactly what the science predicted, and exactly why FIFPro was shouting about it before this tournament had even kicked off. The question worth asking isn't whether something illicit is propping anyone up. There is no evidence of that, and this video isn't going to manufacture any. The real question is why a governing body that designed a tournament this physically brutal is content to let recovery science handle the consequences quietly backstage instead of asking loudly and in public whether 48 teams and 39 days was ever a price the players themselves should have been made to pay. Technology was supposed to fix this. Goal line sensors, video assistant referees, a semi-automated offside system precise enough to measure a marginal call down to a single frame of video and a fraction of an inch. FIFA sold all of it for years as the end of controversy, the end of human error deciding matches that took 4 years and a lifetime of qualifying to reach. Nothing in that theory prepared anyone for what actually happened in the knockout rounds. Days before the United States' own round of 16 match against Belgium, striker Lauren Balogun picked up a red card and an automatic one-match ban for a reckless, studs-up challenge on a Bosnian defender's ankle. Under FIFA's own rules, the same rules that had governed every red card in over 60 years of World Cup history, that should have been the end of the conversation. Instead, the President of the United States picked up the phone and called FIFA President Gianni Infantino directly. Within days, FIFA suspended enforcement of Balogun's ban under a disciplinary clause normally reserved for far more complex cases, and he walked out to start the match against Belgium anyway. Asked why he'd intervened, the president offered an explanation that would almost be funny if it weren't a World Cup knockout match on the line. I didn't know what the hell a red card was. The backlash was immediate, and it came from everywhere. UEFA called the decision one that crossed a red line. Former FIFA president Sepp Blatter, no stranger to controversy himself, put it more bluntly still: red cards are not overturned by political phone calls. Belgium's own federation formally protested the reversal. FIFA rejected that appeal within hours, ruling Belgium had no standing to even raise the question. For what it's worth, the United States lost anyway, eliminated from its own World Cup, 4-1. So if there was ever a plan to keep the host nation alive by any means necessary, it failed completely. And by the time the quarterfinals kicked off, all three co-hosts, the United States, Mexico, and Canada, were already home. Whatever this tournament was engineered to protect, it apparently wasn't the countries paying to stage it. It was, however, still apparently willing to bend for its biggest individual star. A round of 16 later, in Atlanta, Argentina fell behind Egypt by 2 goals with barely 20 minutes left on the clock. Egypt thought they'd scored a third until VAR chalked off Mustafa Zico's finish for the faintest foul in the build-up. Egypt appealed for a penalty soon after, waved away. Argentina then produced 3 goals in 13 frantic second-half minutes, Messi scoring the equalizer himself to complete one of the most stunning comebacks in the tournament's history and advance 3-2. Egypt's own football federation did not accept it quietly. In an official statement, they said they cannot remain silent about the officiating that night. Their head coach, Hussam Hassan, went further in the raw aftermath of elimination, telling reporters his team had been up against forces bigger than football itself. Perhaps they wanted Messi to stay in the running. FIFA sent its own head of refereeing out to personally deny any bias. Independent analysts pointed to something harder to wave away. Across the entire knockout stage, Argentina became one of only a small handful of nations yet to have a single VAR decision go against them. It happened again in the very next round when Briel Embolo was sent off in the quarterfinal against Switzerland under a rarely used mistaken identity protocol that the Swiss manager called flatly unacceptable. None of this proves a conspiracy, and to be clear, even the academics studying the tournament's politics stop well short of alleging the matches themselves were fixed. What it does show is something almost more uncomfortable. The single most bankable, most photographed, most commercially essential player left in this tournament kept benefiting from exactly the moments where human judgment, not machinery, made the call. In a tournament built the way this one was built, around broadcast windows, sponsor logos, and a hydration break sold to a drinks company, it's fair to ask whether that's really a coincidence this many times in a row. This didn't begin in the knockout rounds either. Back in the group stage, Algeria wanted Messi sent off for standing on the calf of their captain, Issa Mandi. He wasn't even booked. He went on to score a hat-trick. Algeria filed a formal complaint of their own within days. And Messi is not even the only global superstar who needed FIFA's disciplinary committee to look the other way this tournament. Cristiano Ronaldo arrived carrying his own suspended ban, quietly reduced by FIFA months earlier under the same clause later used to clear Balogun. Even the ball picked a side in its own small way. A motion-sensing chip buried inside the Trionda caught the faintest possible touch to rule out a stoppage-time Croatian equalizer against Portugal in the round of 32. A call so marginal that without the chip, nobody watching live would ever have seen it. The technology, in other words, is now precise enough to end an underdog's tournament by a fraction of an inch, and yet somehow still finds room for doubt whenever the player under the microscope is one of the 2 most famous men to ever play the sport. Whether that judgment is ever shaded, even unconsciously, by the reputation of the player standing in front of them, or by a phone call a head of state was willing to make on his behalf, is a question FIFA has never had to answer under oath. With only a handful of matches left in this tournament, the fans who have landed on the losing end of one of these calls are still asking it, louder now than ever.
A minute.
So here is where all of this actually leaves us, with the final whistle of this entire World Cup now just days away. A ball so troublesome, FIFA replaced it before the semifinals rather than let it anywhere near the trophy. A stoppage hidden inside a health policy, still drawing boos in stadiums deep into the knockout rounds. A tunnel turned into a press conference nobody consented to. A schedule so demanding that the bodies which looked almost superhuman in June are visibly running on fumes by the second week of July, and a review system sold to us as the end of controversy that a head of state felt comfortable phoning about directly, and that still can't fully explain why the whistle seems to travel differently depending on who's standing over the ball. 39 days ago, you could have written any one of these off as a quirk of the modern game. Now, with the dust finally settling this deep into the tournament and all 5 of them sitting in front of you at once, they stop looking like coincidences. They start looking like something else entirely. A sport, quietly, deliberately, re-engineered, decision by decision, into a product built for a commercial break and a broadcast contract rather than for the 90 minutes it was always supposed to protect. So I'll leave you with the only question that actually matters, the one sitting underneath all of this days before somebody lifts that trophy under 100 camera flashes. Did we just watch a sport? Or did we sit through 39 days of the longest, most expensive billboard in the history of television and call it the beautiful game because that was easier than admitting what we saw? 5 disasters. The ball FIFA had to retire early, the breaks nobody asked for, the interviews players are still refusing, the schedule that's quietly breaking bodies, the whistle that doesn't sound the same for everyone, all the way up to a phone call from the White House. Tell me in the comments which one ruined this World Cup the most for you. I read every single one.
And one more thing before you go. And yes, I know exactly how this sounds after 12 minutes of me complaining about manufactured engagement. Subscribe, hit the bell. Not for me, I promise. I'm fine either way. Do it for you, because somewhere out there, FIFA is already drawing up decision number 6, and the algorithm on this platform is just as capable of burying that story under 60 highlight reels and a golden retriever in a goalkeeper jersey as any broadcaster is of hiding a sponsor logo behind a hydration break. So think of that bell as the one break in this entire video that's actually good for you. Ring it, and I'll see you before FIFA tries this again.